Notice this for a moment. Something happens. A word, a look, a memory, a message that arrives at the wrong time. And before you even understand what you felt, your body has already reacted. Your chest tightens. Your mind races. An old emotion takes control as if it had been invited. You call it me, my way, my personality. But what if it isn't? There's a silent conflict that almost no one notices. You believe you react because you feel, when in reality you feel because you reacted. This is where suffering begins, but it's rarely seen. Psychologically, it seems logical to blame the external event. Practically, it's more comfortable to believe that the pain came from outside. Consciously, however, something doesn't add up, because the same event doesn't cause the same pain in everyone. So where exactly does suffering originate? The answer lies not in what happens, but in the automatic impulse that arises before consciousness, before elaborate thought, before choice. It is there, in that invisible microsecond, that the conditioned mind takes command. Anger, guilt, anxiety, attachment, all of this does not appear after reflection. It appears before. It appears raw, fast, unconscious, like a reflex trained over years. From a psychological point of view, this is a pattern, a circuit repeated so many times that it has become identity. From a practical point of view, it is a reaction that seems inevitable. From a conscious point of view, it is a state of absence. And from a philosophical point of view, especially within Buddhist thought, this has a simple and profound name: ignorance. Not in the sense of lack of intelligence, but of lack of presence. Buddhism never said that suffering begins with pain. It begins with reaction. Reacting unconsciously is repeating. Repeating is strengthening. Strengthening is remaining. Each time you react in the same way, the pattern deepens. Each time the pattern deepens, freedom seems further away. And then arises the silent feeling of being trapped within yourself. Honestly, consider this. How many times have you had the same argument with different people? How many times have you felt the same anxiety in new situations? How many times have you promised yourself that next time will be different, only to realize that everything happened the same way? This isn't bad luck. This is an automatic reaction operating without awareness. There's something unsettling here, and that's precisely why it's true. When you react without being present, it's not the present that decides. It's the past. It's emotional memories, old wounds, invisible conditioning. The present moment merely presses the button. The one who responds is an older version of yourself, a version that learned to defend itself, to attack, to flee, or to cling long before you realized you had a choice. This perception generates immediate identification, because on some level you feel, this happens to me. And at the same time, it generates a silent revelation. If it's not the event, if it's not the person, if it's not the world, then perhaps suffering is not an external enemy, but an unobserved internal mechanism. This truth doesn't hurt, it disconcerts, because it removes the blame from others, but it also removes the excuse. And that's where emotional awareness begins to emerge, not as a quick fix, not as a miracle technique, but as an uncomfortable question that keeps echoing. At what point did I stop being present and start only reacting? The most interesting thing is that you don't need to answer that now. Just feel the weight of the question, because from it, something begins to move. What if the suffering isn't in what you feel, but in how you relate to what you feel? What if there's a space, small, almost imperceptible, between the impulse and the reaction? And it is precisely at this point that awareness comes in, not as a beautiful concept, but as a practical, psychological, and profoundly transformative experience. Buddhism doesn't ask you to change your emotions, control your thoughts, or force a positive state. This is important to understand because many people confuse awareness with repression. That's not it. The proposal is much simpler, and for that very reason more difficult. To observe, just observe, without correcting, without judging, without running away. When an emotion arises, the automatic impulse is to do something with it, to explain, justify, push away, or get completely lost in it. Awareness breaks this habit. It creates a living pause. A moment when you are neither trying to improve the experience nor worsen it. You are simply present. Psychologically, this changes everything because the brain stops operating in reactive mode. Practically, you stop feeding the pattern. Consciously, something reorganizes itself from within. The moment you realize what's happening, the reaction begins to lose strength, not because you overcame the emotion, but because you stopped giving it energy. Suffering cannot be sustained without identification. It needs you to believe the story the mind tells. It needs you to say, "This is me. This is real. This is dangerous." When there is awareness, this narrative weakens. It doesn't disappear all at once, but it ceases to dominate. There is a very beautiful philosophical subtlety here. Consciousness doesn't fight against anything. It doesn't argue with anger, doesn't negotiate with anxiety, doesn't try to convince attachment that it's wrong. It simply illuminates, and everything that is seen clearly begins to dissolve on its own, like a shadow that disappears when the light arrives. This is the minimalist aesthetic of Buddhism applied to human experience. Less effort, more clarity. There's a classic phrase that sums this up almost poetically. Between stimulus and reaction there is a space. This space is not theoretical. It is lived. It's the second in which you feel the emotion in your body, perceive the thought arising, but still don't move. You still don't respond. You still don't identify with it. In this space, something rare is born. Inner autonomy. Not the freedom to never feel pain, but the freedom not to be dragged down by it. This perception brings a realistic hope. Not that exaggerated promise of constant happiness, but the understanding that you can suffer less without needing to change the world. Suffering begins to lose its absolute nature. It ceases to be a sentence and becomes an observed process. And when something is observed, it no longer fully controls the observer. This generates spiritual clarity, even for those who do not consider themselves spiritual. Over time, something curious happens. You begin to perceive your emotions as temporary movements, not as definitive truths. Anxiety comes, but it goes. Anger arises, but it transforms. Attachment tightens, but it relaxes. And all this happens not because you did something extraordinary, but because you stopped reacting automatically. That's the training. A silent, internal training, almost invisible to others, but profoundly transformative for those who experience it. Perhaps you've already experienced this without realizing it. A moment when you took a breath before responding, an instant when you felt the emotion but didn't act. If this has happened to you, even for just a few seconds, you know what I'm talking about. If it has never happened consciously, that's okay. The simple fact of hearing this now already begins to create that space. You don't need to control your mind. Control is exhaustion. Control is internal warfare. The invitation here is different. Stop following it automatically. See thought as thought. Feel emotion as emotion. And remain present enough so that the cycle doesn't complete itself in the same way as always. If this resonated with you, stay. Here, we don't train escape or forced positivity. We train awareness. And now I want to hear from you. Comment below with words like awareness, presence, or space. If you want to go deeper, write, "I observe before reacting." This helps me understand what kind of content resonates with you most, and also reinforces within yourself this silent intention for change.